In the West, we live a very me-centered, a very I-centered reality. Every person is out for themselves. The normal condition of things is dog eat dog. As a result, we all suffer from something known as main character syndrome. We see ourselves as the main character in a story, and everyone else is an extra. There is a camera following us around, tracking our every move. To put it another way, we all live as if we are the sun, literally the center of the galaxy, and everyone else is a planet in our orbit. What differs, however, from one person to the next is how they relate to the planets in their orbit. It's been my experience that most people with main character syndrome fall into one of two categories. They are either takers or they are givers. Now, for the takers, they are the sun and everyone else exists to fulfill their needs. They are the most important piece on the board. This is the individual that borrows money from you and is honestly confused, maybe even a bit hurt, when you ask them to pay you back. This is the person that calls you names and then asks you to apologize for making them so upset. Now, the thing to remember about takers is that they generally cause very little suffering for themselves, but they cause a lot of suffering for the people around them. The reason being is that they are constantly taking from everyone else. So as long as they get what they want, they feel good. And if they don't get what they want, well, they still feel okay about it because clearly it's everyone else's fault. They're just overreacting. Now, takers generally experience a lot of anger and a lot of greed in their day-to-day existence. They're angry when their expectations aren't met, and they're greedy because they're constantly taking from others. Now, when I said they don't create a lot of suffering for themselves, that's not exactly true. Takers suffer quite a bit in the long run. The problem is they don't realize that they are the cause of their own suffering. They don't understand why everyone's so mad at them because they feel like they're being completely reasonable. They lack the self-awareness necessary to interact skillfully with others. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have givers. Now, givers also see themselves as the sun. They also see everyone else as a planet in their orbit. However, givers believe that they exist to keep everyone else in line. It's their job to ensure that everyone else is safe and happy. So where the taker is constantly looking to see how other people can fulfill their needs, the giver believes that it is their sole responsibility to fulfill the needs of everyone else. So this is the person who gets the wrong food in the restaurant, but they just eat the wrong food instead of sending it back because they don't want to cause any problems. This is the person who volunteers for one more project at work even though they're already stretched too thin and they're not sleeping enough at night. They feel like they need to give and give and give until there's nothing left because as the main character, that's their job. That's what the giver does. Now, I'm going to harp on this a bit because what I find is many people in the spiritual community, especially the Buddhist community, feel that it's their job to be givers. They feel like there's some sort of spiritual attainment that can be found but from working ourselves to the bone, not getting enough sleep, not eating enough food. But that's not correct. The Buddha was very generous towards other people, but he always ensured that his own needs were met, because he had lived as an ascetic and he understood that not taking care of our needs doesn't lead us to enlightenment. It only makes us unhappy. More than that, if we're truly serious about wanting to take care of others, we're much more effective if we pace ourselves and do that over our entire lives, as opposed to taking care of them 24/7 until we're burnt out for a short period of time, and then we don't have the energy to do more for them. Now, I want to be clear, very few people are only takers or only givers. We generally go back and forth between the two categories, depending on the period of our lives, depending on the people who are around us. The key in both cases, however, is to remember that we are not the main character. This is why Buddhism offers the teaching of non-self, which does not mean that the self doesn't exist. Obviously, you exist, you're watching this Dharma talk, I exist, I'm giving this Dharma talk. However, the teaching of non-self explains that there is no permanent, separately abiding self. We are all part of a larger whole. So we all have a shared responsibility to care for the people around us. No one's the main character. We all have to give something, and we all have a shared reasonable entitlement, if you will, to take something from the world to ensure that our needs are met. No one is required to go hungry, whether that's spiritually, physically, or emotionally, in order to walk the spiritual path. We can think of this like the trees. They take nutrients from the soil in the spring and the summer, and in the fall and the winter, they allow their leaves to fall back to the ground to give nutrients to the soil. And it's that healthy cycle of giving and taking that allows the tree and the environment to flourish. Now, if we are suffering from main character syndrome as a giver, oftentimes what we will experience is anxiety, because we're constantly looking around feeling like we're not doing enough. We'll experience a lot of guilt for that same reason. Maybe we're taking something from the world and we feel like we don't deserve it. And of course, the giver doesn't create a whole lot of suffering for other people because they're constantly taking care of their needs, but they create a lot of suffering for themselves. So what's the alternative? If we're not meant to be the main character in the story, if we're not supposed to be a taker, causing suffering for others, and we're not supposed to be a giver, creating suffering for ourselves, what are we supposed to do? Well, what we're supposed to do is remove ourselves from the equation and simply take on the responsibility that's appropriate for that moment in time. There are times when, yes, we are supposed to be takers. This is the tree taking nutrients from the soil to create its leaves. There are times when we're supposed to be givers. This is the tree dropping its leaves and adding nutrients to the soil. But in those moments when we're not sure which is which, it's helpful to remove ourselves from the equation. And one way I like to do this is by reminding myself that life is happening around me. It's not happening to me. In other words, things are happening. Some of them are my responsibility because they're the result of my actions, but most of them are not. The sun doesn't rise and set because of little old me. The rain doesn't come because of something I did. My job is simply to respond appropriately in the situation at that given time. And that's your job too. So if we're feeling anger or greed or anxiety or guilt, I like to recite this mantra: around me, not to me. Around me, not to me. around me, not to me. By saying that, I take myself from the center of the equation. I'm not the sun anymore. I'm not even one of the planets. I'm just an asteroid floating out in space, observing the situation, reminding myself that it's not my job to fix every little thing that happens around me, not to me. And with that little bit of space we create, we are better able to decide what we actually need to do in that situation, or if it's best to just do nothing. So I'd like to encourage you gently, happily, don't be the main character in this story. Let other people have that job. Recite this mantra around me, not to me, and simply strive to respond appropriately in the moment, whatever that might mean. Amitabha.